Welcome back to WCCF Tech TV, everyone. It's Keith once again, and today we're going to get about as apples and oranges as we can possibly get in this short discussion topic. And that's what this really is. It's a discussion topic that I'd like for you guys to get involved with down in the comment section if you so feel inclined. Because what we're talking about here is, as PCs have developed and things have changed, the lines have really blurred between what is the best thing for what you're doing with your computer. And that's really the question you have to ask yourself. What are you doing with the computer that you're building? Are you primarily building a gaming machine, or are you primarily building an editing machine? Or are you building a gaming machine that you'll sometimes edit on, or an editing machine that you'll sometimes game on? See, I fit in the latter, so I edit and work more than I game. I know, I'd love to game more than I get to, but the reality is that's why my workstation is what it is, because it's built for what I can afford and what works for me in the working applications that I use, and then what it can do in gaming, that's a bonus. Then you have our test bench. Thing is, I had to get something that would give me the most performance with the GPUs, so that I wasn't limiting the GPUs, or if I was, it was as little as possible. So our test bench and my workstation are two very different things. So what I wanted to do today was take a look at how they compare in a couple of different scenarios, and why one may benefit one group more than the other, while the other may benefit another group. So there's been 100 comparisons of Ryzen and Core series processors, but this is a little bit different. So whenever I said apples to oranges, definitely two very different systems. So our Z370 is running an EVGA Z370 classified K motherboard with a D-lid overclocked 8600K running at 5 GHz with a 200 MHz AVX offset, so it can drop down to 4.8 under AVX loads to maintain stability. And we're running 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3200 CL16 on this setup. And, well, for the fun of it, the GPU that we put on it here for these comparisons is a GeForce RTX 2080 Ti. So the fastest graphics card that we have in my office at the moment. And we're going to compare it to my workstation, which is a really unfair thing to do, but you'll see in the end why I may have done this. So my workstation, this is what I use on a daily basis. I do all my work, all my editing, all my rendering, and what little bit of gaming I get to do, I do on this system. So we're talking about an X370 platform with a Ryzen 7 1800X stock clocked. It's on a larger air cooler, so I got an NHD 15S, but it is left at stock. So 4 GHz on a single core and 3.7 across all cores when that happens. And that seems odd, but it's for cool stability. It's the workstation. And as far as memory goes, we got 32 gigs, so 4 by 8 gigabyte kit of DDR4 2666 CL15. So much slower RAM than you would experience on a gaming Ryzen system, but again, it's not built for gaming. What about GPU? We're running a rather old GeForce GTX 980 Ti EVGA superclocked BIOS is on there, so it's reference cooler. The idea here is eject as much heat as possible, keep the CPU system running as cool as we can. I know that seems odd, but under rendering scenarios and GPU workloads in Resolve, which is what I use, DaVinci Resolve 15, it's fine. So what about performance? That's enough talking about the differences in systems, and these are two very different systems that people may build, and as far as the CPU and the motherboard and the RAM, those overall come in about the same price point. You know, overall they're very similar price. So if that was your budget and you had to work with this, I don't really think most people are going to pair an i5 with the 2080 Ti. But that out of the way, let's talk about the results. So as far as a gaming workload, we did use 3D Mark Firestrike. This is the basic Firestrike, so the 1080p version. And what we saw there was a massive win for the test bench. Of course, we're talking about 25,792 overall score versus my workstation's 14,278. It's clear that that's a big performance difference, and you're going to get a lot more performance in gaming out of the Z370 test bench platform. And that's why we use it as a test bench. What about when it comes to workstation loads? So this is an actual test. This is me rendering out the SK650 video that we already put up. I'll put a link up there if you want to watch the final result of that video. But we're talking about almost 20 gigs of files, and the final rendered video was 2 gigs when it was rendered out to 4K and we did render it at 1080p and 4K to see the time difference. And there's a lot of color correction going on in these video files, and there are overlays and transitions. So this is an actual workload, not just a synthetic workload. This is something that I've done, and I'm going to keep this around as future benchmarking purposes. So rendering this video out that ended up being 8 minutes and 11 seconds on DaVinci Resolve 15 took 5 minutes and 40 seconds on the Workstation, or 340 seconds altogether. So take the minutes out and just do seconds, 340 seconds. Over on the test bench, it took 7 minutes and 23 seconds, or rather 443 seconds overall. This is a pretty big difference when it comes to actual final rendered workload on there. So what about if we move things over to 4K? That should increase that delta a little bit more, but let's take a look at what that looks like. So the Workstation rendered the same 8 minute and 11 second video out at 14 minutes and 54 seconds, or 894 seconds overall, and the test bench was able to render it out at 20 minutes and 29 seconds, or 1,229 seconds. So something to keep in mind here is you can render on an i5 8600K or an 8400K. It's just going to take you a little bit longer. It's not that it can't do it. So when people say, oh, don't do that, you will. You'll be able to render out just fine. You just have to be a little bit more patient because it's going to take longer. That's 6 threads cranked at 5 gigahertz versus 8 cores and 16 threads at 3.7 gigahertz. So low and wide or short and high. So I guess is one way to look at it. But what about the GPUs in there? That is a rendering test. But what about like GPU? Because once you start doing color correction, you start loading things up. Well, we took the Candlelight demo, and thanks to VPS Customs over there on his channel for reaching out to me, informing me about this benchmark, because I've been looking for some way to do this, not just CPU performance, but GPU as well. We see in this particular one with 64 levels of color correction, we see the test bench with the 2080 Ti completely abolish the Workstation in this one. So I guess it's a good thing I don't use 64 layers of color correction. I only use generally one node and a color correction for each video file that's in there. So I can definitely see where if I was doing really heavy stuff that I would benefit from that other one. But at the end of the day, the reality here is it shows you that two very different systems can perform very differently in things that they were designed to do. The Z370 platform was designed to crank out frame rate and gaming performance, whereas my X370 system is a workstation system where I'd get work done. So I guess that's the point of it. Pay attention to what you're building the system for. Your primary use should be your primary decision factor. One may get higher frame rates, but one may give you better results in your workflow. If your workflow is not your primary function, and gaming is, definitely go for the frame rates. This has been Keith with WCCF Tech TV. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic down below. This was very non-scientific. This was very much a let's have a discussion, and it was something that I was curious about myself, and I guess I got my answers, and so did you. So again, it's Keith with WCCF Tech TV. Hope you enjoyed the video. Feel free to subscribe, and we will catch you guys in the next one.